Hey everyone, it's Joel here from Middlelink. Today I'm excited to share a two-part tutorial that will walk you through how you can call an external API from the front end, format the data server side, and then return it back to the browser where you can render it on the page. We're going to do all of this without writing a single line of code and only using no-code tools. In this first video, we're going to focus on building out the API workflow. And to do that, we're going to use Middlelink. Middlelink is a no-code middleware that allows you to make a connection from the front end to an external service, in this instance Airtable, without exposing your API key. In addition to that, we also support caching, and we've got integrations with authentication services like MemberStack and Outsetter if you're looking to gate your content. And yes, this will let you truly gate your content. Now, authentication is outside of the scope of this video. The idea behind this video or this series is to be a beginner video to show you how you can leverage the power of APIs and front-end frameworks without writing code. In the second video, we're going to be using Componentsio, and this will let you build JavaScript components visually without writing code, and then you can export the code and add it to your project. Behind the scenes, it uses petite-vue, so you can leverage state and also templating. Now, I would like to mention that Middlelink is a headless service, so you do not need to use Componentsio. If you're not comfortable using petite-vue, or because it's very early stage, you'd rather use something more mature like Weblocks, then we absolutely support that. And we've actually got a clonable that uses Weblocks, so feel free to take a look. Alternatively, if you're using something like attributes, you could now leverage the power of attributes with Middlelink since FinSuite launched the attributes JavaScript API yesterday. So if you want a video on that, let me know. But let me show you an example of what we're going to be building. So here we've got a football league table, and all of the data is stored in Airtable, and I'll show you that shortly. So here we've got a list of the teams. We've got an image associated to the team. We've got the name. We've then got the games played, won, drawn, and lost. And as soon as this page is loaded, a request is made to Middlelink, which is then made to Airtable. The data is formatted, returns back to the browser, and rendered on the page. Now, it may sound like a lot is happening, but let me show you just how quickly the data is rendered. Now, we do have caching enabled, so that does reduce the loading time, but as you can see, it doesn't take long at all. So let me jump into Airtable and show you the base so you can understand what's going on. So here I've got two tables. The first table is teams, and really the only fields or columns in here are the name and the logo. And then we've got some formula fields as well. So let me go back to the root table. There we go. There we go. So we've got the name and the logo, and then we've got a lot of roll-up fields and then some function fields. If we take a look at the matches table, here we've got quite a bit more data. So this actually uses the same data from a popular football league here in the UK. I'm not going to mention the teams or the league in question. But here you can see we've got around 380 records. We've got the match number, the time, the home team that played, the away team, the home team's goals, the away team's goals. We've then got a formula just to make it look a bit prettier. And then we've got two formulas to calculate the points earned for each team. So if you're not familiar with football, if you win, you get 3 points. If you draw, you get 1. And if you lose, you don't get any. So that's effectively the matches table. But we're not going to be rendering the data for that table. We're going to be focusing solely on the teams. So let's take a look. We've got a lot of roll-up fields here. So we've got the home matches played, the away matches played, and then we've got a function field which sums the two together, so then we know how many the team played. And then similarly, we've got a roll up for the home matches won, the away matches won, and then we sum those together over here. And then we've got the same for drawn and lost. And then if we go to the summary here, this is effectively what we're looking to render on the page. So we've got the name, the logo, how many games they played, won, drew, and lost. And again, if we go back to the page in question, you can see we've got the data here. So let's jump in and start building. So here I've got a fresh Middlelink account. Haven't got any projects or workflows. So what I'm going to do is create a new project. I'm just going to call this tutorial. And next we need to add our domain. So you'll be able to follow along with this video with a free account. However, you will need to use a website with the Webflow domain. If you're looking to use a custom domain, you will need to upgrade. So let me go to Webflow and copy the link address. And I'll paste that in here and create the project. Okay, there we go. So now we've got our project. Here you can see if you are looking to use a custom domain, you will need to upgrade, as I mentioned. To upgrade, it's £19 per project. On a free account, you get 100 requests per month. When you upgrade, you get 10,000 requests per month, and then each additional 10,000 requests is £1. And I would like to mention this pricing was based on our private beta. And as we're transitioning into the public beta now, we will be increasing this price. I'm not sure when. It could be within the next 2 weeks. It could be within the next month. So if you want to grab a subscription at this price, now's the time to do it. So next, you can either set up your API connections on the connections page, or you can do it from within the workflow. So I'm going to show you how you can do it from the connections page, just so then you know and you understand how you can manage your connections. So here I'm going to click Create Connection, and you can see you can add a reCAPTCHA secret key. If you use Webflow, it uses OAuth, and you go through the OAuth flow. But for this instance, we're going to be using Airtable. So you just give your key a name, call it Airtable, and then you add your secret key, or your API key, shall I say. So I'm going to copy my key and paste it. Now, all values entered in the secret key field when you're creating a connection are secured and encrypted, and they'll never be returned back to the browser. So once you've added it, you won't be able to see it again. If you go to look at it, like if you try to change the type of the field, you'll just see it says secret_key. But you can paste another key in if you want to override it. That's absolutely fine. So now we've got our connection set up, we're ready to build out our workflow. So we'll go to workflows. You can see I haven't got any yet. So I'm going to click Create Workflow, and I'm just going to call this League. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is add the HTTP request node, and this will let you make API calls to external services. We currently don't have a deep integration with Airtable. They haven't fully released their Meta API, so we're still waiting for that, but you can still connect. You just need to use the HTTP request node and effectively build out the request yourself. But I'll run you through that now. And I've also got the Airtable documentation open, so we can I can walk you through that. So the first thing you're going to want to do is add the endpoint URL. So if we go to the documentation, and we can see here I'm on the table in question. If I go to the teams table and list records, because we want to list multiple records, I'm going to copy the URL, go back to Middlelink and paste the URL. Now you'll see a question mark in the URL, and after the question mark are all of the query parameters. Now you can leave these here, however it's a bit nicer to define them below, because then it's a bit more visual. And you can see out the box it includes max records 3, so we don't need that. And then the view is root, so we don't want that either. So I'm just going to go down and add these whilst we're discussing them. Add the view, and I believe it's called summary. And it is case sensitive, so make sure you get the case right when you're adding that. Next, we're going to want to select the connection we're going to use. So if you didn't add your connection, you can also do it from this page from within the workflow builder. That's what a lot of our users do now. This was a highly requested feature. Here you can see your keys associated to the project. So I'll select Airtable. We're going to be making a GET request. And we're not going to enable caching at this stage. We'll leave that to the end once we've finished everything, and probably once we've even finished the second video when we're rendering the data. So the next thing we're going to want to do is add the headers. So how do you know what headers to add? If you go to the documentation, you'll see here they clearly define the headers that needed to be added. And I'd just like to mention Airtable is a great API to get started with because they've probably got one of the best API documentations and it's very interactive. So here we want to add the authorization header. So I'm going to copy authorization and then I'm going to paste it. And then in the value, it's bearer followed by your API key. So I'm going to paste bearer. And then rather than type your API key, because this isn't an encrypted field, you want to reference the connection you defined above here. So in order to do that, you can use the mustache syntax. And this exposes all of the dynamic variables you can access. And as you build out the workflow, more will become available. But for now, all we need is the connection. And that's everything. We've effectively set up the API. So we'll click save and run. And now if we click the node, we can see the output. And Airtable effectively returns a list of records. So we can see in our table here, we've got one column and there's one record within it. And that record is a list and we can expand it and see the data. So this is great. We know everything's working, but it's not very visual to work with, if you see what I mean. So we want to make it a bit easier. At the end of the day, this is a visual development tool. So before we format the data, we want to ensure that the request was successful. Because, for example, if you're making a lot of requests to Airtable and you hit their API quota limit, then they'll return an error. So you want to be able to handle that. And we let users handle that themselves. So you can use the logic node. So we'll add the logic node, go to the settings, and then here you've got the options. So you can see we've got the records, which was returned from the previous node in the API request. And we've also got some metadata. So the HTTP request node and also the integration nodes like the Webflow integration node, they return a status code. So we can select the status code and we want to ensure it's 200, which is the status code returned from Airtable if a request was successful. So I'll save that. And when you save a node, you'll be prompted to run the node. And I highly recommend running the node because it then means the next node will have the data from the previous node. You don't always need to run it. And there'll be a good example of when you don't need to next. So I'll run that. And then if we take a look at the data, we can see we've still got the same data we had before, but we've now got two outputs. So the top one is for a successful request, and the bottom one is for a condition that wasn't met. So if the status code was, for example, 401, if the API key was wrong, or if you hit the quota limit. So if something does go wrong, you want to throw an error. So I'm going to add the error node and connect that to the bottom output. That's my mistake there. So we'll connect that. And then I'm just going to type error. And you can add a more descriptive error. So this is an example where you don't need to run the node because we know this request is going to be successful and we know the logic node is up to date. So we can just click no thanks. Now, if the request was successful, then we're going to want to format the data and effectively convert this list into its own table. In order to do that, we're going to use the cell select node. So I'll drag the cell select node, go to the options, And here we can see we've got columns. So we can select the column. And as you can see, we've got the records. So I'll select that. And there was only one record returned in the previous request. So we can leave this as 0. We'll save and then run. And then if we click the cell select, we can now see the data's turning more into a table now. So we can see we've got the ID, the created time, and then the fields. And now the fields currently contains an object, and this is effectively the columns you have within Airtable. So we can see we've got one, the logo, like lost, the name, how many they drew, how many they played, the matches away relationship, and all of the other columns. So that's great. We now know we've got the data, but this still isn't perfect. What we really want to do is flatten the data out so that at the row level, we also want to have access to these properties. And you can do that using the flatten node. So I'll drag the node onto the canvas, go to the settings, and here you can specify the depth and the separator. So I'm just going to leave these as the defaults. So I'll click save and run. And now you can see we've got the ID and created time, just as we did before. We've also got the columns, new columns, which are the properties that were inside the fields object, and they've all been prepended with the word fields. And this is just to avoid any conflicts. So for example, if you had your own column called ID, you don't want to override this ID. But if we scroll through here, we can see we've got the home matches, the name of the team, the logo, and all of the columns associated. So we're getting there, we're almost there. Next, we want to filter out the fields because we don't need to return all of these to the front end. And it's good practice to only return the fields that you want to display on the front end or the fields you need on the front end to the front end. So in order to do that, you can use the column filter. And if we go to the settings, you can see we've got a list of all of the columns that were returned in the previous node. So I'm just going to select all the ones I want. So I want the ID, the name, the logo, how many games they played, won, drew, and lost. So I'll save that and run it. Perfect. So now we've got the ID, the name of the team, the logo, how many they played, won, drew, and lost. Now, it's not ideal that they're all prefixed with the word fields. So what we can do is actually rename all the columns so that they're no longer prefixed. And also this lets us add some consistency because you may want to, for example, have spaces in Airtable in your column names. But when you're working with the data on the front end, it can become difficult. And you may want to use, for example, a snake case, which is all lowercase separated by underscores. So that's what I'll do in this example. So I'll drag the column rename node, go to the settings, and then for each field with a prefix, I'll just rename it. There we go. And lost. If we save that and run it, we now should have the data in the format we want. So we can see here we've got the ID, the name, the logo, which is a list, and we can't flatten this because we can't flatten a list. We've got the games played, won, drawn, and lost. So we've effectively created our workflow now. And the next step is to call the workflow from the front end and then render it on the page. Before we do that, we're going to want to publish our workflow. So I'll click the publish button, and then I'll see you in the next video where we use components.io to render the data on the page.